The first reading for today comes from Isaiah chapter 40, beginning at verse 1. Prepare the way of the Lord. Comfort my people, says our God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, and every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, cry out, and I said, what shall I cry? All people are like grass, and all their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. You who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up, do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms, and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Gospel for today comes from Mark chapter 1, starting at verse 1. The beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight paths for him. And so John the Baptist appeared in the wilderness, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. The whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem went out to him. Confessing their sins, they were baptized by him in the Jordan River. John wore clothing made of camel's hair, with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. And this was his message. After me comes the one more powerful than I, straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to stoop down and untie. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to you, O Christ.
Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. There are times when life just grinds to a halt and we don't seem to be going anywhere. Sometimes we get stuck in a rut where any sort of variety or forward movement or improvement seems beyond us. Often it seems that we're held by powers outside our control. And I guess I'm probably a little sensitive to that myself. Sometimes I feel that the world is just, that's the way it is, there's nothing I can do to change it. There's a bottleneck and forward movement seems impossible. So we get simply demoralised and inactive. Things are not satisfactory, but we don't know how to change it. That's largely the situation of the people to whom this prophecy of Isaiah was originally directed. They too had found themselves at the mercy of larger forces. They'd certainly been caught up, of course, in the history of Israel. They'd been caught up in those huge geopolitical games of the major world powers at the time, and they believed that also to be an expression of larger forces that were beyond that, some of them spiritual forces. For many years, these people had been beaten down, they had been exiled from their home, and they were missing all the old institutions that had given meaning and purpose and stability to life. Sometimes our personal faith goes through those sorts of challenges as well. Sometimes it seems that nothing is now as it should be. The old ways of doing things have either stopped sustaining us, or else they do still sustain us, but somehow they seem to be fading away, and we don't see a way forward. And the same is true of the communal life of the church. It seems there are forces at work in our society that make it difficult to be a Christian in our society. And here too at St. Mark's we look back, many of us, to a time when there were more people in church, where the ministry seemed more active and things were really happening. Sometimes it's hard to find the energy to act, to try to turn that around. Two very common responses to that situation are first to live in denial or to just simply give up on the future. On the one hand, it's tempting to act as if nothing has changed and go on as if there is nothing wrong. That approach simply closes our eyes to what's needed in the moment and it assumes that the future will be the same as it was in the past. So we'll just keep repeating that and that'll make us feel good. On the other hand, the other response to demoralisation and this inability to act is simply to ignore it and to give up on the future. We know that it's not as good as it was, but hey, let's party while we can before it all goes down. There's a temptation to party in the present because you don't believe in the future. And actually, there's an interesting thing. I won't share all my opinions about the difference between a party and a celebration. Whether there's a reason to do this or whether it's a desperate attempt to make ourselves feel. Sometimes it seems that we take up the book of Ecclesiastes and read it in a very negative sense. It's time to eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Underlying these external actions, though, these approaches of denial or capitulation, is the fact that sometimes it seems hard to realistically imagine a future, because we're struck by this sense of powerlessness in the face of the forces around us, an acknowledgement that our internal resources are actually insufficient to create any future. And all of that's made worse by the fact that we feel that we're alone in the situation. We can't find the resource within, but we also believe that we don't have any resources from anywhere else to come. I think all of that's easily observed in the wider Western world, in the church at the moment, but we also see it operative in the lives of individuals and even of this congregation. We don't know what the future holds for us, and perhaps we've lost the sense of agency, lost the sense that we have the ability to change things. At a congregational level, this displays in the sense that I've heard some people say, and not just in this congregation, but all sorts of congregations here, we've lost our mission, or we don't really know what our mission is now. And at an individual level, it comes to us in the fact that we've allowed ourselves maybe to stop growing in Christ. We're no longer engaged in growing in the Word, or maybe we're still continuing to study the Word, but we're not allowing the Word to grow in us, or even to grow out of us. We've given up that sense of moral struggle, or of loving action, or gospel sharing, so the Word then just falls, if you like, on stony ground. Because we're not sure that even if we committed ourselves into it, that there would be a change, there would be a future. Now, the people of Israel that Isaiah originally spoke to had lost their hope and they'd lost their positive vision for the future because they felt estranged from God Himself. They'd broken that covenant relationship with God and therefore had stripped themselves of the only relationship that could have given them hope in the face of the powers that surrounded them. They'd certainly been, the text actually says, they've been paid for their sins. There was a judgment. And they'd certainly been through a period in which they had learned about what the extent of all the proud achievements of the kings of Israel had come to, and it's all summed up in those words, all flesh is like grass. There is nothing permanent in our achievements. They had to acknowledge too that their own faithfulness had been as passing as the flowers of the field. Here today and gone tomorrow. They therefore felt like orphans in the wider world. And something similar may underlie sometimes our sense of dejection or our apathy. When we look at ourselves as ourselves, we see no great reason for hope. Perhaps we've given up on God's help because we don't think that we deserve it. Of course, we'd probably be right. Why do we bother struggling for a better, for a brighter future when the normal course of events and all the structures of the world seem to be so much against us? It's just not realistic to think that we can change ourselves or that we can change the world. But while the prophet Isaiah acknowledges that all flesh is like grass, and we hear that in that passage, he says, "What shall I cry?" And then there's a question here, we don't know who the voices belong to, but I think it's the prophet. What shall I cry? All flesh is like grass, What's the point, I think, is the question. But there's a corrective then further down where the whole thing is repeated again, because all flesh is like grass, but the word of the Lord endures forever. We remember Jesus saying that heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. To give up on the hope of the future is wrong because it hasn't yet considered what God can do. The promise of God that describes the future also makes the future. And what is that word of promise? Well, in this text, it's God's command to the heavenly realms. Comfort. Comfort my people. I think in the translation we had in the opening words, it was different. But the point is that the comfort is actually an imperative. It's a command. It's not just saying they're there, but it's commanding other people, you go and give comfort to my people. Now, which people is that? Well, it could be the prophet or the prophets, but most likely, I think, in this text, it's actually God talking to the heavenly assembly. It is God commanding the powers of the universe, whatever they may be, whether the physical forces of nature, whether the spiritual realms that we know of from other passages. God is talking to the heavenly host and saying, you go and give comfort to my people. But he has a new word to say. He has a new promise to make. And the heavenly realms are meant to obey that. And the prophets are meant to explain it. The promise is that the time of the exile is over. The sin of Israel has been dealt with. And that takes on a whole new meaning now as we read this passage through the lens of Jesus Christ. Through his atoning death on the cross, Jesus now has paid that price, and more than the price in this world, so that God's relationship with us is perfectly restored. And that means that we can now have the same confidence that those people had, that God is now a God who comes to us, and we can say with them, look, here is your God. Jesus came as a human being in history so that we can actually point to a specific moment where God has indeed visited the earth in the one that we call Emmanuel, which means God with us. But because of that first coming, so we also now take comfort in the fact that God is always with us. Whatever the failings of our spiritual lives, we are assured that God is coming to us, that he has commanded that his way now be levelled before him, so that we, along with all people, will eventually see his glory. We look forward to the future because we are assured that God is with us in the present, and he will still be present with us into the future. So that's got to change how we see ourselves. We are not alone. God is with us. God is coming. We don't rely only on our own resources, but we have confidence that God has resources available to us because of his promise to us. We are not powerless before the structures of the world or the supernatural powers of the heavens, because God, who commands and rules over all those powers, is on our side. The last verse of the prophecy assures us that the sovereign Lord comes with power and he rules with a mighty arm. God can achieve things in us, God can achieve things through us that we might never imagine. But God is not only powerful, he's also loving. But the prophet says, see, he comes, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. That reward, that recompense he is talking about, is his people. In the original context, the imagery is that God has brought back as the spoils of war. He has won his people out of Babylon. And now God is coming back to the city. Notice the important thing is that God is coming back to Jerusalem, but with him he brings the people. So this imagery, this expectation that the people will return is actually an expectation that God will return, and because of that, the people can come. And now again, as we read it through the eyes of Christ, we understand that God has claimed us in Jesus Christ as his very own. In the spiritual warfare and the battle of what Christ did on the cross, now he comes and his reward is with him, and we are that reward. We are God's recompense. We are the spoils of war. We are the stuff that God has worked for so hard so that He will be paid in us. Kind of staggering, really. But that's what He wants. God cares so deeply for you that you are His treasure. No wonder then that He tends the flock like the shepherd, and it says He carries us close to His heart. You are absolutely not alone in this world. God has promised to be with you, and more than that, He is with you wherever you are, and whatever is happening to you, you are also with Him. You are His lamb that He carries close to His heart. You do not need to be afraid of the future, because God will lead you and carry you into it. We can therefore dare to dream for something different. For there are powers beyond our control. Nothing is beyond God's control. Though we may lack resources to make changes in ourselves, God has a mighty arm. Though by ourselves we are insufficient to the moment, yet we are not by ourselves. We can be certain that with God a vital future for us personally and for us together is still possible. We're set free, therefore, to look to what God's future for us may be. We don't need to retreat into the past and simply keep repeating it, or we don't need to give up on the future and just party on, because as the saying goes, we may not know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. There are still many things that can be achieved in us and through us, personally and us as a congregation. God holds us as His own dear treasure. And with that, then, He also gives us a mission. In verse 9, if you happen to look in the NIV translation, you'll probably see there's a footnote to it. It says, we could translate this a different way. So it could be, you who bring good news to Zion, go and proclaim to the cities of Judah. Or it could be, Zion, you who bring good news, go give good news to the cities of Judah. So it could be the prophet that's being addressed, or it could be the city itself. But in either case, note the dynamic that the person who themselves has been caught up into the message, who themselves now has received the comfort of God's people, and who knows that the Lord is returning and that the Lord is on their side, that person is now given the role of proclaiming to everybody else the same message. When God comes to us with the amazing news that He claims us as His own treasure, and He holds us to His chest as a shepherd holds a precious lamb, we then are given the role of passing that on to others. God is not done with us yet. He still gives us a place in His word, and He gives us a joyful future with Him. As He speaks to us tenderly and gives us the comfort of His presence, of His power and of His care, so too He also says to us, comfort, comfort. And now you too go, and you comfort my people. The peace of God which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. Christ, the Son of Righteousness, shine on you and make you ready to meet Him when He comes in glory. And the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord look with favour upon you and give you His peace. Amen. Go with peace, joyfully preparing the way for the Lord. In the name of Christ. Amen.